Friends of Ireland. So we were determined that this year we would not be stuck. In fact, last year we were so optimistic we thought we could postpone the event, the reception we were going to have, until June and do it in Bloomsday instead. But that clearly was far too optimistic. We were afraid we could be prevented again this year, but we decided that we can meet and we can celebrate, even if it has to be virtually. And in looking for a theme to enliven our evening in Geneva, I thought back to the article which Noel Curran of the EBU wrote in the Irish Times in January. And he wrote of his visit, following a visit to Davos, to the graveyard in Cour, where the great Irish artist Harry Clarke is buried. But he also wrote of the lack of a marking for his resting place. And he wrote of Harry Clarke's imagination and artistry. And we were all struck by the reaction to that article. And we decided to bring together tonight some people who are experts on and have an interest in this great Irish artist. He was a man who seemed set to symbolize the vibrancy, imagination, and artistry of Ireland, but who died far too young here in Switzerland in 1931. A man who's known to so many people all over Ireland by his stained glass windows in churches all around the country. And a man whose perhaps greatest work, although the experts may argue about that, was destined for Geneva as a gift from the new Irish state to the International Labour Office, which stands out almost 100 years after it was commissioned as a great modern Irish work of art, drawing on some of the greatest achievements of the Irish literary revival at the start, the first part of the 20th century. But this was the gift that was never given. And we will explore that and the genius of Harry Clarke this evening, reflecting a little on Ireland's engagement with Geneva as a place where we have been meeting the world since the foundation of the Irish state. And by the way, where this year we, Ireland, conclude our first ever term on the governing body of the ILO. We have with us this evening in our community, our virtual community, we have members of the family of Harry Clarke, his descendants, joining us online, and we welcome them, and we hope that we can do justice to his life and his genius. We have some great speakers and some great music. And some of that music may not be related directly to Harry Clarke, but it's certainly related to the celebration of St. Patrick's Day. And St. Patrick's Day, I should add, was the birthday of Harry Clarke. He was born on 17th March, 1889. So before we get going, and we want this to be an interesting but really enjoyable evening also, just to let you know that we all know Zoom calls and Zoom events from over the last year, but just to remind you that you're muted at the moment, but please post your comments on the chat box. And I think people have started doing that already. And we will take questions from the chat box in our question and answer session later, once the speakers have made their presentations. And finally, I just mentioned that we have some vouchers to give away to our to some of you this evening, and we'll have a random draw, which our technical people will carry out. It's nothing to do with me. I will just announce the results, but we have some vouchers, which hopefully will link you up with Ireland. Well, those of you who aren't in Ireland at the moment. So let's get going, and we'll open up this evening first with a short video from RTE to introduce Harry Clarke and one particular piece of his work, which is now in Dublin. So we'll go straight to that video just for about 3 minutes.
For decades, Dublin coffee drinkers have enjoyed their daily tipple without realising that they were seated beneath the work of one of the world's finest stained glass artists, Irishman Harry Clarke. A quintessential Dubliner, Clarke grew up and worked here in Dublin's north inner city. Much of his life was spent in these elegant Georgian streets. So it's fitting that his masterpiece, The Eve of St. Agnes, should finally find its home today in the Hugh Lane Municipal Gallery on Parnell Square. This remarkable intricate stained glass window was inspired by the romantic poem by John Keats.
Though there was a belief that if a young virgin dreamed of her lover on the eve of St. Agnes's feast day, that he would come to her in a dream. And so that's the basic story. So we see at the beginning that we see that there's a feast day being held by Madeleine's family, and there were little fairy players above. And then you see Porphyro coming through the blizzard because he is programmed in the poem to sort of come to be there on that evening. And then you see Madeleine being taken up to her chamber by her old beldame. In the most wonderful nightdress. And then you see her going to bed, and the moonlight is shining through the stained glass panels in her chamber. And then Porphyro arrives, and Madeleine can't believe it, and she thinks it's a dream because she knows that people can dream of their lovers. But it's real. He really is there, and he really has come to take her away. And then there's this wonderful final image when they unlock the huge door and go out into the blizzard. So it's incredibly romantic, and happy ever after, we hope.
The window was commissioned by Harold Jacob of the Jacob's Biscuits family for a window in this house on Dublin's Aylesbury Road, which is now St. Michael's College. The Crawford Gallery in Cork houses a large collection of Clarke's drawings and sketches bought from the artist in 1925. These drawings for the Eve of St. Agnes provide remarkable evidence of Clarke's intricate process and artistry.
He made art from his stained glass. It no longer was a craft for him because he was an amazing illustrator and an amazing draftsman. So I think it really has become an art form. And the one notable thing about Harry Clarke's work is it's instantly recognisable. It's so distinctive, it's got such a strong graphic quality and this great dew-like quality that's very apparent in many of his windows. He was really drawing on glass. The Eve of St. Agnes would be one of the most popular works in the gallery, and it's one that people still come back to see again and again and to look at very, very close details, because some of the details are absolutely amazing.
Harry Clarke died of TB in 1931. He was only 41 years old. He left behind works of genius, an extraordinary blend of his fantastic imagination and his undisputed technical skill, which found its ultimate expression in the Eve of St. Agnes.
Okay, well, that's your initial introduction in that beautiful short video to Harry Clarke. But we're going to turn now to our first speaker for the evening, Fianna Griffin, to introduce us to the genius and significance of Harry Clarke. And she knows this well. Fianna has taught Irish Cultural Studies at All Hallows College in Dublin, at Dublin City University and elsewhere. And she was the partner of Harry's son, the late David Clarke, himself a painter. And she has written on and lectured on the Clarkes and on the Geneva Window. So, Fianna, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Hello? Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself there. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was trying to unmute myself. It said the host wouldn't let me. So anyway, now I'm going to share the screen and hope this works. Just give me 1 second and we will go to what's all that?
Fiona, open up your,
Yes.
go to your PowerPoint first.
Yes, that's what I'm doing. I think so.
Stop sharing your
Slideshow.
screen first.
Oh,
There we go. There we go. Put it in full screen mode.
So I cancel this thing and full screen mode and slideshow and from the beginning.
Very good.
Okay, I'm sorry about that, but we're there now. First of all, I want to say I'm very happy to be invited to talk on St. Patrick's Day, or in honor of St. Patrick's Day, and to talk about Harry Clarke. As the ambassador has said, he shares a birthday with St. Patrick's Day. In fact, he was, sorry, I just need to, here is Harry Clarke. As you can see, he was actually christened Henry Patrick, so he just about avoided being called Paddy Clarke. So I'm here particularly to just give you a quick, in a few minutes, look at the circumstances that fomented his genius and the course of his life. I suppose you might say if Harry Clarke's life was a fairy tale, that all the good fairies were at his birth and they gave him extraordinary gifts. But one bad fairy decreed that, unlike the Eve of St. Agnes, it didn't all end happily ever after. So he was born in the right place at the right time. The time was the Irish literary and cultural revival. Harry Clarke's life straddles the cultural revival. He began with its first stirrings. He was born with its first stirrings, and he died as it was petering out, but not before he had immortalized it in his extraordinary Geneva Window that Roisin is going to talk to us about. He was an integral part of the cultural revival. He was a regular attendee at the Abbey Theatre. He knew many of the playwrights and writers. His best friend was Lennox Robinson, who was managing director of the Abbey Theatre in the 1920s. And he loved and thrived on the atmosphere of cultural ferment in Ireland before independence. The sense of pluralism and openness. He was what you might call a cosmopolitan Irishman. He was very fortunate as well in his family. His father was a businessman, an Englishman, and he set up a church decoration business, to which he added, when Harry was 4, a stained glass studio, so that the clergy would have a one-stop shop for all their needs. His mother was a West of Ireland Catholic. She was romantic and soulful, passionate and sensitive, and he took qualities from both of them, perhaps more like his mother, but shaped by the influences of his father, and extraordinarily shaped by somebody with a natural artistic bent, by being born with a stained glass studio in the house. He wasn't an outdoor sportsy type. He was a very shy, quiet sort of person, though with confidence, inner confidence. And he spent a lot of time at home from school with ill health, either reading or watching the men at work. So you could say that he grew up learning the art of stained glass. His mother died when he was 14 and his father took him out of school, and basically he wanted all the family to be involved. There were 4 kids, Harry was the 3rd, involved in the family business of the studios. The studios was a commercial business, as was normal in those days. It was not so much an art as a craft, although Joshua did employ good artists. But in order to make use of what he saw as Harry's potential for art, shown particularly in the caricatures that he used to do of teachers and friends at school, he sent him to the Dublin Metropolitan School of Art. First he went at night, but then he won a scholarship for the remaining 3 years, and he won a gold medal each one of those 3 years for his work in stained glass, which was absolutely unprecedented. But he was particularly fortunate in that a couple of years before he went to the Dublin Metropolitan School of Art, there was the first ever master of stained glass brought in to teach the pupils. This was an attempt to improve the quality of church glass in Ireland. And this man, A.E. Child, taught them according to the standards of the arts and crafts movement in England, which was basically that they should do every aspect of the window themselves, from the first design to the final leading up, so that it was a complete work of art. And this appealed enormously to Harry. That's what he wanted to do. He was very happy when he was at art school. He made a lot of friends. He felt free. He wasn't working, or very little. He was working hard at his studies, but and he had time free in the summer to travel. Influenced by John Millington Synge, who was his great hero, he went to the Aran Islands in 1909 and loved it so much that he went back every year until 1914. And here we get an example of his initial orientation, which was very much on the caricature style. His sketchbooks from the time are full of this kind of drawing, an unerring hand. The last year that he went there was 1914. At this time, he was accompanied by a bigger group, including Margaret Crilly, the artist, who became his wife later that year, phenomenal artist. And also here we have Sean Keating, very good friend of his, who became a very well-known artist and teacher of art. And also, ironically, it is Sean Keating who in 1961 presented a mural on Ireland's economic progress to the International Labour Office as Ireland's belated gift to that organisation, when it should originally have been Harry Clarke's Geneva Window. Keating was a good friend and one of the few people who actually commented on Harry, because Harry was not an extrovert. And according to himself, when asked about his life one time, or his life story, he said, "Well, as for me, there is no story." His life was work apart from the arts. He was incredibly committed to his work. But as a man, when he allowed himself to be, he was endlessly amusing, a wonderful mimic, a clever caricaturist and close, ironical observer of the human tragicomedy. I can only say that his son, David, remembers him as the most whimsical, amusing, and delightful of people. His first love was literature. It was an accident of fate that he ended up making stained glass. When he graduated from the Dublin Metropolitan School of Art, the first thing he did was go to London and try to get a commission for illustrating works of literature. Finally, after much trying, he was commissioned by Harrops to do illustrations for the Hans Christian Andersen stories. And you can see, as I'm sure many of you already know, how extraordinarily beautiful they are. And they also commissioned him a couple of years later to do the illustrations for Edgar Allan Poe, who was a particular love of Harry's. His best friend Lennox described him as you see, a sharply contrasted two-sided man. His enormous sensitivity to and ability to reproduce beauty, and an absolute fascination with monstrosity, the macabre, and in his own words, he was unshockable. Edgar Allan Poe, his illustrations for Edgar Allan Poe are actually quite tame by comparison with the last book he illustrated, Swinburne's poetry. Now, the studios was a family affair, but until 1921, Harry deliberately chose to remain freelance. He was happy that way. Eventually, in 1921, he did a deal with his father, whereby they would they decided they would pool their resources, Harry's genius and his father's business acumen, and they would run the best stained glass studios in the British Isles. So they signed a contract and Harry moved into the studios and agreed to take over all commissions that came in for churches all over the place. Not to execute them all personally in the arts and crafts style, but to either design them or supervise the design or have some hand and part in them, and to basically certify that they were up to standard. But a couple of months later, his father died and left him holding quite a lot of work. At first, he was ambitious about it, and he even moved across the road from number 33, where the studios was based, to 6 and 7, and a bigger premises. And he hoped to make it so successful that they could open studios in London. That was his great dream. But it proved increasingly difficult for him to cope with the demands of all the work, and also the demands that he put on himself to go on taking commissions, whether of stained glass or of book illustration, or he had such a diverse imagination and range of skills. He did handkerchiefs, he did all sorts of things. And by the time he was, by about 1926 or 7, he began to feel that he was no longer able to cope. He said at one stage he felt he was becoming a hack. So he tried to get out of it. He tried to go back to being freelance. But his two sisters didn't really work, very, very little, and lived off the investment in the studios. His brother worked there and was married with 6 children. And Harry had his own family. He had his own wife and 3 children. Margaret was earning some money as a portraitist and painter, an excellent one, but she was also looking after their 3 children and wasn't earning a lot of money. So after a couple of months, having retired from the company, he went back to it and resigned himself to continuing, although by this time, the very business that had been a kind of a greenhouse for his genius when he was young had begun to feel like a prison. Unfortunately, the way out of that prison for him was the least attractive. He was diagnosed with TB in early 1929 and sent to Davos. And he spent most of the next 2 years there, optimistic at first for quite a while, but terribly homesick. So much so that he wrote in a letter home that he said, "Even the shaky glass in the hall door has all my love." And on his little diary in minuscule handwriting, in minuscule letters, he marked off every week, numbered them all off. But he couldn't even get home for a couple of weeks in the summer to go to Greystones on the annual summer holiday. But he didn't show this. As W.G. Lockett, the English consul and editor, said of him, he was one of those magnetic men to whom if you once talked, you were ever afterwards drawn. And when his friend Lennox Robinson visited him there in late 1929, he found that there was a steady stream of visitors to Harry's room, that he wasn't on his own at all during the day. And he tried to put a stop to that. It's also interesting that the only time that Davos had an Irish society, the Davos Irish Circle, was while Harry was there and he was the first president. But he was worried. There was so much on his mind. The Geneva Window was one of the main things on his mind, but also a huge, fantastic 3-light window for the Catholic Church in St. Patrick's Church in Newport in County Mayo. So given the day that's in it, I've included a little detail of St. Patrick. The window itself is about the judgment, the final judgment. And on the right-hand side, you have all the damned. This is a little extract from the damned because I want you to see, if you can, but you can't with, it's over it. Can I move this over a little bit? No, it's gone. Anyway, Harry's own face is there in that extract, upside down, hurtling towards hell. Well, we know he didn't go to hell. but he did try to outrun death. And a few days into 1931, he contacted a friend of his in Paris and asked him to take him home. They only got a short distance from Davos when he died, in Cour, and this is the grave. And I think Noel Curran may be talking more about that. So that's just a very, very quick run through the life and genius of Harry Clarke.
Thank you so much, Fiona. We asked you to do a lot in just a few minutes, but I think you've really given us a sense of the man, Harry Clarke, and with some amazing photographs there that some of which I haven't seen before, and ending very poignantly on with that gravestone about which we'll talk later. So Fiona, thank you, and we'll come back to you in the question and answers. So just to slightly change the mood a little bit, we're going to go before our next speaker, we're going to go for some music, and we're going to turn to the band who played at our last St. Patrick's Day reception here in Geneva, which is now 2 years ago, and now have to play virtually from their homes in Geneva, in Ireland, and elsewhere. So we're really delighted to join with the Emigrants for the first 2 pieces from them this evening. So this is the Emigrants playing by Zoom, and they're playing tonight, first for us now, Glencoe. So we'll go straight to that.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Foxes among healthy sheep, we slaughtered the house of MacDonald. Well, cruel is the snow that sweeps Glencoe and covers the grave O'Donnell. And cruel is the foe that raped Glencoe and murdered the house of MacDonald. Here we go. They were lost in the snow. Some lived to accuse him that struck the first blow, but none were alive. Call MacDonald. Cruel is the snow that sweeps Glencoe and covers the grave O'Donnell. And cruel is the foe that raped Glencoe and murdered the house of MacDonald. Oh, cruel is the snow that sweeps Glencoe and covers the grave O'Donnell. Cruel was the foe that raped Glencoe and murdered
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, that's the Emigrants. They're an absolutely brilliant band. And when they can play again, I'm sure that anyone in Geneva would want to book them. You may ask what that music had to do with Harry Clarke, and nothing at all, but it was really good music. We're going to, just before we go to the next speaker, I mentioned that we've got some vouchers. We've done this random draw from those of you who are at the event today. And so we have a voucher for the Kilkenny Design Centre, and that has been won by Carla Briggs. And we have a voucher from Kenny's Bookshop in Galway, and that is going to Emma Kennedy. So I hope you can manage to, we'll get the vouchers to you, and you can go online and buy whatever you want up to the amount of the voucher. So back to our theme and to Harry Clarke. So we're going to turn now to Dr. Roisin Kennedy, who will focus, as Fiona said, on the Geneva Window. Roisin is assistant professor in the School of Art, History and Cultural Policy at University College Dublin, and she was formerly Yeats curator at the National Gallery of Ireland. And among her many works, she is co-editor of Harry Clarke and the Artistic Visions of the New Irish State, which was published in 2018. She has studied the history of the Geneva Window, has come to visit the site it was meant to be in, and she will speak to us on that today. And you know, this is a live Zoom event, so it will all go right, but just if there's any little hitches, bear with us. But Roisin, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Or you can. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now, I hope. Hooray, I hope you can all see that.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for inviting me to this wonderful event, and to the team for supporting me in the technical aspects, which I hope are going to work. Okay. So I'm going to just talk to you about the Geneva Window. In 1927, the Irish government commissioned Harry Clarke to design and make a window for the newly constructed International Labour Office building in Geneva. This was an important opportunity for the Irish Free State to promote a distinctive cultural identity through visual art to an international audience. The window, described by Lennox Robinson as one of Clarke's most beautiful, most characteristic and original works, illustrates excerpts from the writings of 15 modern Irish writers. The scheme was Clarke's own invention. He was not given any official guidelines or suggestions as to a suitable subject. He suggested in a memo that he sent to Dublin to the ministry that the subject should not necessarily do with labour, but preferably something from the work of a modern Irish writer. It should give opportunities for fantasy rather than be of mythological or classical interest. This was a highly original take on the project, as the other artworks in the building tended to stick rigidly to the theme of labour. Clarke's design was endorsed enthusiastically by W.B. Yeats, by the art critic Thomas Bodkin, and by the playwright and director of the Abbey Theatre, Lennox Robinson, who, as Fiona has said, was a close friend of Clarke's. And Clarke discussed the writers that he was going to include and the design of the window with these figures. The window highlights the enormous contribution of the Irish nation to world literature, which more than any other aspect of modern Irish culture had achieved international recognition. The principal location for stained glass in the International Labour Office building was this one here, these 5 large windows on the staircase in the entrance hall of the building. But this space was already taken when Clarke visited Geneva in 1926. Germany had commissioned a stained glass window, which you can see here by Max Pechstein, which was installed in late 1926. It's since been removed and is now in the new ILO building in Geneva. So Clarke was forced to choose another location for his window. He hadn't designed the window at this point, but he had decided that it was going to be to do with Irish literature. And he recommended instead that the proposed gift of the window should be made for this opening here of a window on the regular staircase outside the deputy director's office in the building. A photograph of this inauspicious location was sent to Dublin by Edward J. Phelan, who was a senior administrator and future director of the ILO. Situated on a first floor corridor, far removed from the entrance hall and the former reception rooms, the window was the same dimensions as many of the other kind of functional windows in the building. There was nothing particularly special about it. And in fact, a fire extinguisher was positioned right on the wall beside it. Despite the reservations of civil servants, Irish civil servants, Phelan convinced Dublin that the location was the best solution. It got, he argued, little front light from any other windows, an essential condition for the proper display of stained glass. But secondly, its location was outside the entrance to the deputy director's office, which would ensure that the window would be seen by important visitors who will have business with the deputy director. Moreover, Phelan wrote, it will become one of the exhibits of which the office will be proud, and visitors would therefore be taken specially to see it. Irish-born Phelan knew many leading figures in the Irish government, including President W.T. Cosgrave, as well as being an admirer of Harry Clarke's work. Clarke argued that his much smaller but more innovative window would have a more impact on the visitor to the ILO than that of the larger but more conventional German window. He noted that the Irish window could be made into a precious gift. The German work, he said, is clever, but to me does not convey any pleasant impression. Its position and size are infinitely more dominating than the staircase window, but the latter, if properly done, should make people more interested. Clarke suggested that his proposed window should be made using the same sort of techniques that he had employed in the production of the Eve of St. Agnes window, which, as we saw in the video at the beginning, he'd made it in 1924. And he suggested that the ministry employees and officials in Dublin should go to St. Michael's House and view the Eve of St. Agnes window there. The window involved the double layering of clear and coloured glass. It was etched and painted to produce a myriad of different textures and colours and tones, and it was remarkably different from Pechstein's window. Now, each of the four horizontal sections of the Geneva window are carefully constructed in terms of composition, colour, harmony, and thematically move from patriotism, spirituality to the commonplace, depending on the text that they're illustrating. This top tier, these are the top two tiers of the window here. The top one is dominated by the hierarchical but saintly figures of St. Bridget from Lady Gregory's play, The Story Brought by Bridget, and Joan of Arc from George Bernard Shaw's 1923 play, St. Joan. In the second tier, two sets of embracing lovers feature here. Christy Mahon and Peggy Mike in a vibrant red dress from Synge's Playboy of the Western World, and an otherworldly couple from Seamus O'Sullivan's poem, The Others. This section here is contrasted over on the right by the drama of a companion panel which illustrates James Stephen's fantasy novel, The Demigods, in which three towering angels startle Patsy McCann. And the tier is completed by a scene from Sean O'Casey's Juno and the Paycock. It's based on a photograph of the celebrated actor F.J. McCormack in his role as Joxer Daly. And the realist setting for this, the O'Casey part, is gleaned from the Abbey's production of the play. So you can see, and we'll maybe talk about it later, that Clarke used a whole variety of sources for his imagery. The next tier down shows Robert Emmet. This is from Lennox Robinson's play, The Dreamers. And this figure, I think, provides the most conventionally patriotic part of the window. It shares the panel with a scene from W.B. Yeats's play, The Countess Kathleen, in which the Countess is accompanied by the infatuated and very androgynous figure of the poet Alil. The attitude of Alil arguably draws attention to Kathleen's sexual power, an idea that recurs in the treatment of George Russell's pioneering drama, Deirdre, in which Deirdre's naked, reclining body is scarcely concealed by the tightly wound sheer drape that encloses it. It shares the panel with the most controversial section in the design, and that's the depiction of the middle-aged anti-hero of Liam O'Flaherty's 1926 novel, Mr. Galooly, where the figure is shown, well, he's drinking champagne and leering at his young mistress, Nellie. The bottom tier illustrates Padraig Colum's popular ballad, A Cradle Song, with the men coming in from the fields, peering in through an open window at the young mother cradling her infant. This scene of domestic piety is counteracted by the next section depicting George Fitzmaurice's fantastical one-act play, The Magic Glasses. Here, the young hero of the play, Jaimini Shannon, sways in an inebriated state, surrounded by gigantic glasses of champagne. Tiny nude figures cavort around these objects, two of them dancing on Shanahan's head and pulling at his ear. The bottom right-hand corner of the window illustrates Seamus O'Kelly's romantic story, very popular story of the Weaver's Grave, where the handsome young gravedigger stands gazing at the beautiful widow. And although Clarke considered including an illustration from Ulysses in his initial list of texts, the final section illustrates a poem from Joyce's chamber music from 1907, a much earlier work. Given the prescriptive attitude of Irish society in 1930, when the window was completed, the prominent representation of young female figures in its design is remarkable, as is its exploration of the dynamics of sexual power. In the Playboy panel, Christie's hand touches the breast of Peggy Mike, while the young woman's hand in the others is held provocatively to her companion's groin. Nellie performs a striptease for Mr. Galooly, while Deirdre shamelessly reveals her nude body. Most of the men depicted in the window are shown as overwhelmed by erotic, romantic, or even alcoholic yearnings, while the women are aloof and restrained, the object of attention and desire. Work on the window was interrupted, as we've heard, by the artist's ongoing treatment for TB, which necessitated long periods in a sanatorium in Davos, and leading to his premature death in January 1931. The completed window was temporarily erected at government buildings in Merrion Square in September 1930, when Clarke had returned for a period to Dublin. It was inspected by representatives of the government, including William Cosgrave. While complimentary about the artistic merits of the work, Cosgrave suggested that another panel be put to replace the one illustrating O'Flaherty's Mr. Galooly. He told Clarke, "I feel it would be unjust to you as well as to the council," that is to the cabinet, "to lay open to hostile criticism the beautiful work which the window contains by associating it with subjects that would displease." In 1931, the government asked the Catholic Bishop of Killaloe, Reverend Dr. Fogarty, for his opinion. While expressing reservations about the panel illustrating O'Sullivan's The Others, the bishop was in favour of the window being installed in Geneva. An official note on his view records that Fogarty was very much impressed by the work. He realized that it would be very difficult to make an effective change, and for that reason, he would be in favor of presenting the window as it stands. He thought it a wonderful example of stained glass art and felt it would make a tremendous impression. The choice of writers, as much as the imagery, seems to have been of overriding concern to officials in Dublin. Several of those whose work was represented in the window were becoming very vocal in their opposition to the censorship of literature legislation that the state was enacting in 1929, and others, such as most notably O'Flaherty, were to have their writings censored. The attitude of those who made the final decision regarding the installation of the window is perhaps typified by the reaction of one senior civil servant who argued that if the work was installed in the International Labour Building, a nation famed as a Catholic stronghold would be represented as a bizarre, almost viciously evil people steeped in sex and drunkenness and sin. The government's decision to formally acquire the Geneva Window in early 1931, despite the fact that it had no intention of displaying it, ensured that it was exhibited in neither Geneva nor Dublin. It's unlikely that Clarke's motives for making the window were consciously political. While he had envisaged some opposition, he probably did not anticipate the intense resistance that the government raised against its installation and its public exhibition in the 1930s. Clarke had largely avoided public controversy up to this point, despite the often problematic nature of his designs. Bridget Pepin attributes this to the fact that in his work, obscenity was kept at bay by a dimension of comedy, which invited the spectator to participate in the inversion of accepted notions of propriety and in the transmutation of the symbols of religious faith. And she's talking more about his illustration and his religious paintings there. By June 1931, 5 months after the artist's death, it was apparent that the government had decided against presenting the work to Geneva, but Clarke was never formally told of this. The window was never erected, as we know, and nor was it displayed in public for many years. In 1933, Clarke's widow, the artist Margaret Clarke, managed to buy it back at the full price of £450 from the new Fianna Fáil government, which also disapproved of the work. From 1963 until the 1970s, it was put on display at the Dublin Hugh Lane Gallery, and in 1988, it was acquired by the Wilsonian Museum in Miami, where it had last found a permanent home. After 1930, the proposed gift was no longer referred to by Edward Phelan in his correspondence with Dublin. Occasionally, questions concerning it were raised at the ILO in Geneva, but were answered by the fact that the artist had died or that Phelan was pursuing the matter. Eventually, in 1961, a mural by Sean Keating, who, as we saw, was an old friend of Clarke's, Irish industrial development, was installed on the main staircase of the ILO building. It presents a masculine world of industry, technology, and livestock breeding, and includes a portrait of a politician, Jack Lynch, the minister responsible for its commissioning. The image of Ireland that it presents is more rudimentary than that of the decadent, humorous, and sensuous vision of Clarke's Geneva Window. The complex beauty and contradictions of Clarke's work aim to amuse, delight, and provoke the viewer. It prioritizes the power of fantasy and imagination above commerce and finance. And perhaps, as Brian Fallon wrote in 1988 when the work was sold to Miami, it was probably poetic justice that the window had gone overseas. Beguiling and suggestive, it would never provide a politically acceptable image of the Irish state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roisin, and thank you for introducing everybody to the imagination and the fantasy of that window, which I think there's nobody in our audience today would disagree. It would have been a fantastic and appropriate gift from the Irish state back in 1927 or 1930. And it would today be something of which we in Geneva, I think, would be hugely proud. But it is now at the Wolfsonian at Florida International University. And I know that there are one or two people from the Wolfsonian with us this evening. So they tweeted today that they look forward to seeing an icon of our collection through your eyes. And I think, Roisin, you have really, really shown us that through your eyes very brilliantly. Thank you so much. Now we have some more music, and we have the huge honor to be joined live from her home here in Geneva by the Irish singer and Eurovision winner in 1996, Emer Quinn. And Emer is going to sing for us this evening live, and I will ask her to introduce this particularly beautiful piece of Irish music in honor of our event and Harry Clarke and St. Patrick's Day. So Emer, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, Ambassador Gaffey and everybody else here. And thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this very worthwhile event where we can all enjoy the mastery and majesty of Harry Clarke's work in this, the country of his final resting place. And indeed, happy St. Patrick's Day to all of the many of you who have joined us here in Geneva. The piece that I chose this evening is, I think, fitting in many ways because it's a work of Thomas More's, one of his own poems, The Song of Fionnuala, Lear's only daughter transformed to swan. And so it's an allegory of longing for Ireland. Many of us abroad longing for Ireland on St. Patrick's Day, and indeed everybody at home longing for a St. Patrick's Day that we might recognise. But also that we think of Harry Clarke leaving Davos for Ireland, longing to be in Ireland, knowing that the end was coming for himself and making it no further than Cork there early in January. And so we remember him this evening, we remember his family, and I have the pleasure of having a recording of the wonderful Belfast cellist and composer Neil Martin playing an accompaniment, which I can play for you as I sing. Sorry, just one moment.
Thank you, Emer. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Emer. That was a very, very fitting tribute and beautiful singing. We've just switched a little bit now from that beautiful music, but still we've got a good message. We've got a message now from Guy Ryder, the Director General of the ILO, and Ireland joined the ILO in 1923. It was the first international organization that the new state joined. And as I said earlier, this year, Ireland completes remarkably its first ever term on the governing body of the ILO. And one of the highlights of that 3 years was the visit by President Michael D. Higgins in June 2018, when he spoke to a captivated audience at the International Labour Conference. So we'll go over now to a short message from Guy Ryder, the Director General.
I'm very honoured to have this opportunity to join with you in celebration of St. Patrick's Day. It is, I'm told, the most widely observed national day of all, a public holiday not only in Ireland, but in Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada and in Montserrat in the Caribbean. And in times past, I have myself participated with some gusto in my hometown of Liverpool. This global reach says something important about Ireland and the Irish. Of course, about the diaspora and the history and dynamics behind it, some of it heroic, some of it tragic, some of it the everyday search for decent work and a better life. But also about the accessibility and attraction of Irish art and culture. And also about Ireland's international vocation and its embrace of multilateralism. The history of multilateral institutions is studied with the defining contributions of Irish leaders, from the founding of the League of Nations right up until today, and I will not encumber you with a recitation of the names that you know and their contributions with which you are familiar, except to say that the very first international civil servant was the Irishman Edward Phelan, who became the ILO's fourth Director General and was predominantly responsible for the ILO's survival during World War II and the post-war vision of a better world, brilliantly captured in the Declaration of Philadelphia. I'm proud too, if a little sad, that this event comes just as the Government of Ireland completes its first ever mandate as full member of the ILO's governing body. You've made a big contribution and a big difference as we celebrated our centenary and were then plunged into the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. We owe you sincere thanks. Dear friends, I've long admired Sean Keating's mural, Irish Industrial Development, presented by the Irish government to the ILO in 1961, and which today takes pride of place in the building of the WTO. I had been vaguely aware of Harry Clarke's stained glass window, that present that never was. But now, having learnt more about it and having studied it, I have a confession to make to you. I like it even more. And if the morals and the sensitivities of the day prevented it coming to the ILO, I'm somewhat consoled that this was a purely Irish decision. Nobody's perfect, but the ILO had no part in it, and we belatedly made an effort in the 1970s to bring the window to our current building. Alas, that didn't work. And so St. Patrick's Day is a wonderful occasion to celebrate the life and the work of Harry Clarke and everything that is depicted in the Geneva Window, with its evocation of the greats of the Irish literary revival. And yet it is a great of a later generation, much quoted these days, who to my mind captures best Ireland's multilateral reflex, and certainly what it has always done for us at the ILO, to make hope and history rhyme and so bring in the longed-for tidal wave of justice. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Well, a big thank you to Guy Ryder there for that really, really good, really nice message. I note that he makes very clear that it was not the ILO which rejected the window. He also mentioned Edward Phelan, the first ever international civil servant. And just, I think Roisin and Fiona will know better, but I suspect that Edward Phelan was very much involved in promoting and pushing Harry Clarke on that window, and that he certainly would have wished it to be here in Geneva. So I'm going to turn now to somebody I mentioned at the start of the event, which is Noel Curran, who's the former Director General of RTE, and is now here in Geneva as the DG of the European Broadcasting Union. And Noel, just you started a lot of us thinking again about Harry Clarke with your article in the Irish Times on the 4th of January this year. But maybe you could just kind of share with us your interest in Harry Clarke, how it come about from in Ireland, and your experience of Harry Clarke here in Switzerland.
Thanks, Michael. First off, can I say happy Patrick's Day, happy Paddy's Day, whatever way you say it, to everybody for tomorrow. Strange one, but I'm sure we'll all still enjoy it. Thanks for organising this, Michael. Really good. Fiona, Roisin, fantastic. Well done. I think for me, and I won't speak too long because I know we're running a bit late because there's been so much good content and we do want to get to questions. But I think I grew up in Carrickmacross, County Monaghan, and we had some Harry Clarke windows in the local church, and that's where I was introduced to him when I was in primary school. A teacher said we had world famous artists on display in the church. So I went in, I found out where they were, and I wasn't at all an artist. I was into writing and literature more than art, but I could see there was something really different about them in terms of the color, in terms of the design, and, you know, compared to everything else in the church. And that kind of started a kind of a pilgrimage for me, going back through secondary school, dropping in, studying the windows. And the more I saw them, the more I realized how different they were. You know, the images, the two lights or two windows of St. Kira, incredible detail, incredible design. When in the evening when the sun was going down, the light coming through was just extraordinary. But then you notice other things. I also remember for today, the death of St. Patrick was another one of the small lights that he did, and small but just incredibly moving. And it just really struck me. But then you notice other things. St. Dibna is another window, and you suddenly notice that there are some strange images. You notice that there is a beheading on the bottom, one of the sub lights, and you kind of go, that was unexpected. And then when I went to college, I learned more about Harry Clarke, and I learned about his edge. He was very edgy in terms of what he did. He had an edge to his work. He had beauty, he had light, he had use of nature, he had all those things. But there was also, for me anyway, an edge to his work. Be it eroticism, be it macabre, be it whatever, there was something quite different about it. And then I learned about beyond the stained glass, the illustrations, different things like that. And I'm far from an expert, but I was always quite drawn to it. He was also from Phibsborough, which is where my mother was from. She lived just opposite the Mater Hospital in one of those small houses off Berkeley Road. And I spent my early years in Phibsborough when I went to Dublin, so I knew North Frederick Street, I knew all that. Another artist I like, Patrick Pearse, was also from that area. I think he knew Harry Clarke. So I became very interested in him and kind of followed him in that way. And I think that that's part of the interest in Clarke, is that a lot of people feel they have some ownership of him because he had windows in the local church. I would have had to travel an hour and a half to Dublin to go to an art gallery, but I could go in and look at a genuine piece of art 2 minutes away. So, and I think that's why there is that sense of ownership about Clarke for a lot of people around Ireland, outside of Dublin as well. And I think that's important. When I came to Switzerland for work a few years ago, I knew about Harry Clarke. He had died on his way home as Fianna had said, I think it was Fianna who wrote years ago that he actually died in a sanatorium in a village close to Cúr, rather than in the town itself, if I remember. Fianna, I could be wrong on that, but I seem to remember you writing that before. So I visited the graveyard, and I just found it just strange that there's nothing there, zero, no commemoration. And it's a lovely graveyard, and Cúr is a beautiful town, actually, really nice, rugged Swiss mountain town. And here's somebody world famous. Here is somebody that we're all very proud of, that Irish people are very proud of, who, you know, the poignancy of him trying to get home to Ireland, and there's nothing. And, you know, one of the family, Nikki, who I think is here tonight, wrote to Michael during the week and said, you know, and I hope she doesn't mind me quoting this bit from the email, but she said there's nowhere to put flowers. And that struck me. And the reason was the family put this lovely headstone that you saw, but they didn't realize that in Switzerland you had to pay money after a certain amount of time, and they just didn't realize it. And they didn't. And then he was moved to an unmarked grave somewhere else in the cemetery. And, you know, it's, you know, I just see a quote here. I see something in on the chat from someone saying, it's strange you can live in Switzerland and see Joyce, but not Clarke. And I think that that's, you know, that kind of sums it up as well. So I just found that very strange. So I wrote the article in the Irish Times to try and get some publicity around it, to try and get some momentum around this. I met you, Michael, and we'd had hoped to do something, but then horrible COVID got in the way of everything. We've met Ambassador Hickey in Bern, the Irish ambassador, who's going to look into this. So for me, there's two aims. One is to increase awareness of Clarke, just increase general awareness of him, remember him. And secondly, hopefully to come up with some kind of commemoration. A plaque would be amazing. That would be fantastic. But even an event, even something like an event that people can attend, that we can mark that he is buried in Cúr, that he is buried in Switzerland, and remember him. And it isn't Michael that he needs this. You know, his art is his greatest legacy. People can see it everywhere. We are very, very lucky as Irish people to look at this art and to have him as one of our own. But you know, you can do that. But I just think it's very, very strange to visit a cemetery, a beautiful cemetery in Cúr, with someone like that, and as Nikki said, nowhere to put flowers, nowhere to go to. And I would just really like to see us do something, either a plaque or some commemoration or some kind of commemorative event. So that's, you know, watch this space. You know, I think we all 12 or 14 months ago couldn't predict what was going to happen. So I'm not going to make any predictions. I've given up that game. But let's just see where we get to on it. And I think in the meantime, we can all enjoy everything he's done. We can look at his work, we can enjoy his work, we can visit his work, and that is just as important. So thanks again, Michael, for this, for the initiative, pulling it together really quickly. And thanks to everybody who's taken part. And this is just a kind of another step in the way. And myself and Michael and Ambassador Hickey will stay in touch on all of this. So thanks for joining, everyone. And please have a great St. Patrick's Day tomorrow.
Thanks a million, Noel. Thank you very much for that. And I think what we do now is I'll just go straight into the question and answer, but we only have a few minutes now because we've run over a bit, because we could actually go on for 3 hours without any difficulty on the subject of Harry Clarke. But just I've quite a few questions in, but they're really, I'm grouping them around one issue that really has gripped people. And I just to ask Fianna and Roisin, and then Noel again, we'll just conclude. But your ideas on how you would like to see Harry Clarke commemorated more effectively than he is at the moment. I mean, I think there's a huge amount of interest in him, but in whatever area you feel. I mean, Noel has spoken about commemorating him at his resting place. But there are other things that we can do, I'm sure. And I just before we conclude and try to draw that together, I'd just like to hear from you how you feel that we, I suppose, as an international community, as an Irish nation, as people in Geneva, in whatever way you want to see it, how would you like to see a little bit more effective commemoration and remembering and basically enjoyment of the work and the imagination of Harry Clarke? Fiona, I'll just hand it over to you and then we'll go to Roisin.
Well, something I did write about once before when I was writing about Harry is that so many of his works are in churches that are closed except for a few hours a day. Others where not very many people go. He has these masterpieces all over the place that are quite inaccessible. And I would love to see a museum of Irish stained glass set up. They have several in England. There are lots of places. The one craft, art and craft that we have absolutely excelled at in Ireland is stained glass. And although the National Gallery has made a bit of a move towards it now by having that room with stained glass in it, and that's wonderful and it's a start, nevertheless, I really feel we should have a museum of stained glass and be adding to it from contemporary artists as well as time goes on. And to acquire Harry Clarke works as often as possible when churches close. I mean, occasionally you hear stories of people buying a disused church in the countryside, turning it into a house and discovering there are 2 Harry Clarke windows in it. That happened some years ago. So to me, to have a museum of stained glass and maybe call it the Harry Clarke Museum would really mean something.
Well, now that's a great idea. I suppose we won't achieve it here in Geneva, but it's really good to start to air that notion now and to promote it, because, you know, when COVID is over, we need to look again at how we commemorate and what our museums are like and what they're for. And, you know, we've got all those churches which are closed for the moment by COVID, and yet they're full of these amazing stained glass windows all over the country, in County Mayo and County Kerry, in County Offaly, everywhere. So, Fiona, that's a great idea. Roisin, what about you?
Oh, well, I hadn't really thought. You've sprung this one on me.
Sorry.
I think the idea of a stained glass museum in Dublin or in Ireland somewhere is a wonderful idea. Maybe there already are institutions, but maybe something that looked at the arts and crafts movement in more detail, and particularly the legacy of stained glass. On a more political note, I think the best legacy would be if the Irish state really invested in art and design education. That would be the best tribute that you could pay to the artists of the past, is invest in the artists of the future. And I'll leave it at that. But that's what I think.
Well, that's a very telling point. Yes, about the past. It's about the young artists of the future, and Harry Clarke was once one of those young artists.
Yes.
And just a question to the two of you again. It's come up. You know, was Harry Clarke? I mean, we're told Harry Clarke was not political in the Irish sense, and yet he was tied in very much to the European modernist movement. Yeah. And it's just wondered, some people have asked, and I've wondered myself, he learned his trade and his art through stained glass in churches. Did that constrain him, do you think, or did it liberate him? And how did he end up with his final work being such a almost revolutionary non-ecclesiastical work?
He, as well as working for, I mean, most of his stained glass, Fiona can jump in and correct me, as can members of this family anytime, but Clarke also he wasn't just somebody who worked for the church or making works for churches. He also did, like the Eve of St. Agnes, for example, or the windows in Bewley's, he also made windows for secular contexts and for domestic contexts. So there was much more to him than the religious aspect. And I think in many of his stained glass windows for churches, as Noel Kern has alluded to there, they're very complex works of art that very often have elements in them which are quite irreverent, and he was able to get away with that, I think, because of his relationship with the individual clerics, you know, who went to the studio and who commissioned the work from him.
Thanks, Roisin. Fiona?
I agree with Roisin. As I was trying to say, his main interest was literature. He was accidentally making stained glass windows because of his family background. It wasn't his choice, it would never have been. And he was at heart totally irreverent, absolutely. A total individualist. I mean, you know, didn't have time to go into it, but if you read his letters, for example, to Bodkin or to other friends, you know, they're full of things like, you know, I wish that you were in this such and such organization with me so that we could make hell for the stuffy ones from the arts and crafts movement. I mean, he was absolutely opposed to everything stuffy, everything conservative, everything narrow-minded. He was not so much a modernist, to my mind, really, that could be argued, but he was certainly a symbolist, a decadent, not in his character, but in his outlook. He didn't have boundaries, and he didn't have any time for political correctness. And, you know, he wasn't political. He wasn't against the Irish government, but he was ambitious. That's the other key point. And he wanted his work to be seen. And the more controversial his Geneva Window was, the more it would be seen.
Thanks, Fiona. I think it strikes me that study of Harry Clarke is important in itself, but it also helps us understand much better the diversity of Ireland, even in the 1920s. I suppose there's a bit of a tendency to look back at that time as just an era when artistic imagination was closing down for a while, but in fact it was a very diverse and active artistic time, and it speaks very much to us today, I think. And Noel, just to say to you, to give you some final words, I think it is worth our thinking together, and our audience as well, just thinking through what we can do. I mean, there is a very obvious thing. We could do something in Geneva to promote the window, but one thing that we can do, which I think the family really would like us to take on together with them, is to find some way at least of marking his final resting place. The thought that he is resting in an unmarked grave in Cour, it really says something to us as Irish people here in Switzerland. And I think, Noel, we should work on that and also come up with other ideas. This is the decade of centenaries in Ireland, and there'll be a centenary soon enough of the actual Geneva Window. We might think what we might do there, but I'll give you that final word, Noel, on what you think we can take forward.
Yeah, I think we need to just see what we can do. I think the Fiona and Roisin made some brilliant points there, you know, which is, I think looking, it's not that Harry Clarke needs this. He has these incredible works of art. We should try and make sure that as many people as possible see them. I think stained glass has been neglected as an art form. And anyone who just looks at the close-ups of the Geneva window or his other work will see what an art form it is. I also take the point around artists. You know, my wife is Emer Quinn, who sang earlier, and I know how difficult the last year has been for artists, performers, musicians, and I think the political point that Roisin was alluding to is a really critical one. We need to realize this. And where are the next Harry Clarkes going to come from if the arts in Ireland are not fully supported, particularly now? I think in terms of Switzerland, we have to be able to do something, Michael. You know, you'll charm your way in. I know you will. You'll win whoever we need to over up there. I've complete faith in you. So I think we need to try and do something. And as I say, it's either a permanent commemoration or plaque or something, or else at least an event. to mark his passing in Switzerland and his final resting place. So, you know, let's work together and see where we can go with that. And Ambassador Hickey is going to help us as well, I think.
Great. Well, thank you, Noel. Look, we've gone over time because we needed to, and we could have gone on for much longer. But I think we need to draw this to a close now. We've got some music, but I really have to thank our participants today. I thank you, Noel, and thank you, Roisin, and thank you, Fiona. I mean, you have introduced us, all of us, to Harry Clarke, his significance, his genius, but above all, his relevance to us today. And it was good to end on that note of what we can do in terms of promoting his art, but also promoting the young artists of Ireland and elsewhere. So that would be a living memorial to Harry Clarke. And we need to do something on his actual resting place here in Geneva. I am hugely grateful to you, and especially also to Emer Quinn for her beautiful, beautiful singing in honor of Harry Clarke and in honor of St. Patrick's Day. It has been a different St. Patrick's Day, but I hope you've enjoyed it. There's no pints of Guinness. I hope you've had a few drinks, maybe some of you, but it really has been a wonderful evening for us. Before I finish, I have two more vouchers to give. And the two people who have been randomly chosen, one for a voucher from Kenny's Bookshop is Julie Asamat, and then for a voucher from the Kilkenny Design Centre, Johnny McCoy. So those are the four people who won something tonight, but I hope everybody got something out of tonight. I really did. I really think it was a great evening. And let's take it forward from here. And I will say we'll do more of this, but I really hope that this time next year we'll join together here in Geneva to celebrate in person with maybe a few drinks and the music of the emigrants. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic St. Patrick's Day tomorrow, even though I know you can't do much on it, but still enjoy it. And we're going to go out now with a final song from our friends, the emigrants. And this one is called Before the Deluge. So thank you, everyone. Have a very happy St. Patrick's Day. And we'll leave you now with the emigrants singing. Thanks a lot.
Some of them, they were dreamers. Some of them were fools who were making plans and thinking of the future. With the energy of the innocent, they were gathering the tools they would need to make their journey back to nature. When the sun slipped through the opening and their hands reached for a golden ring, and their hearts, they turned to each other's hearts for refuge. In the troubled years that came before the deluge, some of them they knew pleasure, some of them knew pain, and for some of them it was only the moment that mattered. And for where them
Okay, everybody who's left, turn on your camera and unmute, and then we can actually hear the applause. Oh, anyway, happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Oh, there.
Well done.
Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Well done, first
Bye.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Claire, Garth Maugud. Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
That was the business, guys. Well done.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thanks a million. Well, you can all switch off now.
We're only getting started.
Have a drink, everybody.
Oh, yeah.